high above the glowing skyline of Manhattan. Sebastian Vale stood in his penthouse office, gazing out at the city stretched beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. At just 32, he ruled Vale Industessa, technology empire valued at more than $50 billion. His steel-grey eyes carried the same sharp ambition that had driven him to the top. A path littered with broken partnerships and abandoned relationships. Sebastian had learned young that trust was a weakness. When he was only 12, his mother walked out on the family, choosing wealth over love as she ran away with his father's business rival. His father, Robert Vale, never recovered. Hardened by betrayal, Robert raised Sebastian to believe that everyone had a price, and given the chance, anyone would sell their loyalty. The penthouse mirrored its owner's nature. Sleek lines, glass walls, and steel surfaces, expensive, flawless, and utterly cold. It was less a home than a monument, a place stripped of warmth and emotion. For Sebastian, that was ideal. Feelings were unpredictable variables, distractions. He had no patience for 3 floors below, in the staff quarters. Grace Morgan was finishing her shift as head of housekeeping. At 26, she carried a quiet beauty that drew people in warm brown eyes, auburn hair that shimmered under the light, and a smile that softened even the hardest day. Life had not been easy on her. Her father's medical bills had forced her to juggle extra jobs, and for the past 2 years she had worked in the Vale household, caring for spaces that weren't her own. Grace cleaned with precision, not because she feared Sebastian's judgment, but because she took pride in everything she did, no matter how small. Unlike the other staff who grew tense in Sebastian's presence, Grace never fawned over him or tried to gain his attention. She greeted him with simple courtesy, carried out her duties, and quietly disappeared into her world. It was this very indifference that unsettled Sebastian. Everyone he met wanted something: money, influence, access. But Grace seemed untouched by the lure of his wealth. Sometimes he caught himself watching her, the way she hummed softly while dusting shelves, the way she left subtle touches of vase shifted slightly, a folded blanket that made the cold penthouse feel almost human. And though he would never admit it, Sebastian Vale found himself intrigued. The return of a dangerous past Victoria Sterling swept back into Sebastian's life like a storm that had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tall, blonde, and devastatingly beautiful, she was every inch the vision that once captivated him. 3 years earlier, she had nearly destroyed him, not with a knife, but with betrayal. His former fiancée, she had secretly funneled confidential business information to his competitors. The treachery had cost him millions and nearly sabotaged one of his most critical acquisitions, and now she was back. Victoria knew precisely how to play his weaknesses. She appeared at his office, draped in a scarlet dress that once set his blood on fire. Gliding into the leather chair opposite his desk, she crossed her legs with feline grace and purred, "Sebastian, darling, you look magnificent. Success suits you." His expression was cold, carved from stone, but the subtle tightening round his eyes betrayed her effect on him. "What do you want, Victoria?" His tone was ice. "I assume this isn't a social call." Her laugh spilled into the roomlight, sparkling, dangerously intoxicating. "I want us, Sebastian. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I've spent 3 years regretting them, but I've changed. Let me prove I can be the partner you deserve." Sebastian leaned back, his gaze sharp and unreadable, the same look he reserved for hostile negotiations. Victoria was flawless, dazzling, and undeniably capable of maneuvering through his world. She could be an ascetic, elegant trophy wife, whose presence could bolster his empire and open doors to new alliances. But Sebastian Vale did not allow emotions to guide his empire. Not anymore. That evening, pacing his penthouse, Sebastian's thoughts darkened. Trust, betrayal, the dangerous masks people wore. His eyes landed on Grace, carefully dusting the shelves of rare books in his private collection. She treated each volume as if it were sacred, though he doubted she could afford even the cheapest among them. And then it struck him, a test, cruel, but necessary. He would strip away the polished facades and see people for what they truly were. That night, he would pretend to be drunk, vulnerable, unguarded, and watch. Watch how Victoria reacted. Watch how Grace reacted. Watch who would see him as prey, and who would reveal loyalty when they thought he was at their mercy. It was a ruthless game, but Sebastian Vale had long ago convinced himself that cruelty was simply another tool for survival. In his world, sentiment was weakness, and trust was a liability. This test, this experiment would separate truth from illusion. He would begin with Victoria, then his inner circle of business associates, and, finally, Grace. Grace intrigued him the most. Unlike others, she seemed to want nothing. Yet Sebastian knew better. Everyone had a price. He only had to uncover hers. Over the next few days, he studied her with the same precision he applied to hostile takeovers. Grace arrived each morning. At exactly 7 o'clock, greeted the staff with warmth, and moved through her duties with quiet grace. She never touched what wasn't hers, never rifled through his papers, never tasted food from his lavish kitchen, never crossed boundaries. At lunch, she retreated to the modest staff room with a library book in hand. Sebastian once caught sight of the cover, a biography of Marie Curie. When another maid asked about it, Grace smiled and replied, "I love reading about people who changed the world through determination and kindness." The words lingered in Sebastian's mind. In his experience, the world was changed by power, money, and ruthless ambition. Kindness, that was a weakness, a liability. Yet something in Grace's voice, in her conviction, unsettled him. Could goodness itself be a kind of strength he had never learned to wield? Still, curiosity alone wasn't enough. He needed proof. The setup for revelations, Sebastian designed his test with meticulous care. He would stage moments of apparent vulnerability, drunkenness, distraction, weakness, and watch. Watch who sought to protect him, and who would bear their greed when they thought he was defenseless. The first trial was Victoria. He invited her to dinner at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. There, he feigned intoxication. Swirling glass after glass of wine, his words deliberately slurred. Victoria played the doting fiancé for precisely 15 minutes before producing papers urging him to sign. Access to his personal accounts, she claimed, for our future. Together, when Sebastian resisted, the mask slipped. Her charm curdled into cold calculation, revealing the predator beneath the polished beauty. His business associates proved no better. One by one, they revealed their hunger, pressing for favors, contracts, inside information, each testing how far his supposed weakness could be exploited. Each encounter confirmed what Sebastian already believed. Greed ruled the world. Loyalty was a myth. Trust was a fool's game. And yet, when his thoughts turned to Grace, doubt crept in. She was next. Each business associate had failed. One after another, they had tried to wring secrets from him, secure deals, or maneuver themselves into an advantage. while he pretended to be too drunk to remember. Their greed was so transparent, it almost bored him. Still, Sebastian felt a grim satisfaction in watching his suspicions confirmed. Human nature, he reminded himself, was transactional. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had a price. Everyone except, perhaps, Grace. She was the one who unsettled him. Unlike the others, she stood outside his empire, untouched by his wealth or influence. She didn't need him to succeed. She wasn't a rival or a schemer or a polished socialite playing the long game. If anyone could show him an ounce of genuine human decency, it would be her, so he would test her Friday evening. Most of the staff would be gone, leaving Grace to finish her final rounds. Sebastian staged the scene with meticulous detail. A crystal, decanter of whiskey on his desk, an unlocked safe in plain sight, and sensitive documents left deliberately exposed. He rehearsed the pater slight slur in his words, the lazy sprawl in his chair, the dull glaze over his eyes. Vulnerable, careless, exactly the sort of weakness that predators circled. But as he waited, Sebastian felt something unfamiliar coil. Inside him, nervousness. A part of him wanted Grace to be different, to prove that not all people were governed by greed. Another part braced for disappointment, certain she would confirm his cynical truth. The soft tread of footsteps in the hallway cut through his thoughts. Grace had arrived. He leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, watching from the shadowed corner of his study. As she moved through the outer rooms, her presence brought with it a gentle rhythm, the swish of fabric, the quiet clink of objects being set in place, the faint hum of a tune under her breath. Grace worked with unhurried purpose-straightening cushions, dusting the polished glass, restoring order with delicate precision. There was something almost reverent in her movements, as if she drew real satisfaction from bringing harmony to cold, lifeless spaces. Sebastian's gaze lingered on her longer than he intended. The sterility of his penthouse seemed to soften. Around her touch, as though she breathed a warmth into rooms that had never known it. He forced himself to remember why he was here. This was not about admiration. It was about revelation tonight. He would learn the truth about Grace Morgan, and the results would change both of their lives. Forever, Sebastian had planned it with precision. He would wait until Grace entered the study, then observe her reaction to seeing her powerful employer in a state of apparent weakness. Would she steal? Would she pry into the documents? Would she reveal her true colors when she thought? No one would ever know. The door opened softly. Grace's gentle knock came first, as it always did. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice polite, steady. "I just need to tidy up in here, then I'll be finished for the evening." Sebastian lifted his head, eyes deliberately unfocused, his body slouched in the leather chair. He let his words slur, practiced and deliberate. "Grace, come in, don't mind me, I'm just celebrating another successful day." Grace stepped into the study. Her gaze swept over the scene, the whiskey bottle, the scattered contracts, and, instead of the flicker of greed he expected, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. She set her cleaning supplies aside and spoke softly. "Mr. Vale, are you feeling all right?" she asked gently. "Perhaps you should get some rest." Sebastian waved a careless hand, nearly toppling his glass. "Rest is for the weak, Grace. I built an empire by never resting, never trusting, never letting my guard down." He gestured toward the papers strewn across his desk. "These contracts alone will make me another 100 million. Money, Grace, that is all that matters in this world. But she didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, she stepped closer, her concern deepening. Mr. Vale, money can't buy happiness or health, she said quietly. You work so hard, but when do you ever truly enjoy your life? Her words caught him off guard. Most people would have stolen a glance at the open safe, at the exposed wealth, at the bait he had laid out like a trap. Grace hadn't. Her attention was fixed entirely on him. Enjoy life. Sebastian gave a bitter laugh, still keeping up the performance, though his control faltered for the first time. Life isn't about enjoyment, Grace. It's about survival. About making sure no one can hurt you before you hurt them. Grace didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a chair close to his desk and sat, her movements calm, unpretentious, filled with the kind of natural dignity no finishing school could ever teach. Mr. Vale, she said softly, may I tell you something? My grandmother once told me. For the first time that evening, Sebastian felt his carefully crafted mask slip. Grace's grandmother had not been part of his calculations. Yet, inexplicably, he found himself nodding, curious about what she would say, though he would never admit it aloud. And in that moment, without even realizing it, the test had already begun to fail. But not in the way Sebastian had imagined. At least, Grace said softly, her voice steady but warm. She cleaned houses her whole life, just like I do, but she was the happiest person I ever knew. She always said, happiness comes from the connections we make with other people, not from the things we accumulate. Sebastian felt an unexpected pang at her words. When had he last been happy, truly happy? When had he last trusted anyone enough to let them see who he was beneath? The armor of power and wealth. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman, he admitted, momentarily forgetting to slur his speech. But wisdom doesn't pay hospital bills or put food on the table. Grace's expression grew thoughtful. You're right about that. Mr. Vale, I know what it's like to worry about money. My father's medical treatments cost more than I make in 2 years. But even when things were hardest, we still had each other. We still had love. Sebastian leaned forward despite himself, curiosity overtaking the charade. Tell me about your father. Grace's eyes softened, lighting with fond memory. He was a carpenter. He could build anything, beautiful furniture, entire houses, even toys for the children in our neighborhood. When he got sick, he couldn't work anymore, but he never lost his kindness or his hope. He always told me, how we treat people when we have nothing to gain is what defines our character. Sebastian swirled the whiskey in his glass, pretending to take another drink while her words sank in. Her father's philosophy was the exact opposite of everything his own father had drilled into him. In Robert Vale's world, character was weakness, and kindness was a mask people wore until it no longer served them. And yet, there was a strength in Grace's voice that unsettled him, an unshakable conviction that felt more solid than steel. Character. Sebastian repeated slowly, tasting the word as if it were foreign. In my experience, character is a luxury. Poor people can't afford it, and rich people don't need it. Grace shook her head gently, her auburn hair catching the light. I think you're wrong about that, Mr. Vale. Character isn't about what you can afford. It's about who you choose to be, when no one is watching. The irony of her words hit him hard. Here he was, literally watching her, secretly testing her, and yet she was choosing compassion over greed, choosing honesty over advantage. Sebastian leaned back, his curiosity genuine now. What would you do, Grace, he asked. "If you found $1 million lying on the street, with no way to trace it back to its owner?" Grace grew quiet, considering the question with a seriousness that most people would never bother with. Grace's eyes held steady as she answered his question. "My grandmother used to tell me, the richest person isn't the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least." She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "I would turn it into the police, Mr. Vale. That money belongs to someone, and they might desperately need it. I could never enjoy something that came from another person's loss." Sebastian searched her face for the smallest flicker of dishonesty, the faintest shadow of greed, but there was none. Either Grace Morgan was the most gifted actress he had ever encountered, or she was exactly as good, as pure as she appeared to be. As the evening stretched on, his carefully staged performance began to unravel, not because Grace failed the test, but because Sebastian found himself drawn into real conversation. She spoke of her dreams, how she hoped to one day open a small library in her neighborhood, her hours volunteering at the local shelter, the books she loved, and the quiet ambitions she carried in her heart. Never once did she ask him for money. Never once did she try to impress him with flattery or steer the conversation toward his wealth. When he accidentally knocked over a stack of sensitive contracts, Grace didn't even glance at them. She simply bent down, gathered the papers neatly, and returned them to his desk without reading a single word. The most telling moment came when Sebastian let his wallet slip from his pocket, scattering several crisp $100 bills across the polished floor. Grace bent down, collected every one of them, and placed them carefully on his desk. "You should put that away safely, Mr. Vale," she said with gentle concern. "It isn't wise to leave so much cash lying around." Something shifted inside him, then a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Grace wasn't perfect. She had her struggles, her fears, her quiet battles. But she was good, genuinely good, in a way Sebastian had convinced himself no longer existed in the world. The revelation of true worth. As Grace finished her duties and moved toward the door, she paused. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but filled with sincerity. "Mr. Vale, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem very lonely. Wealth and success are wonderful things, but they can't replace human connection. Maybe you could try reaching out to old friends, find ways to use your blessings to help others. I think you might discover more happiness than you expect." Sebastian lifted his gaze, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She wasn't angling for a reward. She was simply offering kindness to a man she believed was hurting. "Thank you, Grace," he said quietly, his voice stripped of the performance, softer and more genuine than it had been all evening. I'll think about what you've said." And for the first time in years, Sebastian Vale wondered if trust, if goodness itself, might not be the weakness he had always believed. After Grace left, Sebastian sat alone in his study, the room eerily quiet except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. The whiskey glass sat untouched beside the pile of contracts that had once seemed so important. Hours earlier, those papers had been his entire world: power, control, leverage. Now they looked meaningless, nothing more than ink and signatures, weighed down by emptiness. His test had failed, or perhaps it had succeeded in ways he had never intended. Grace had passed every trial with unshakable honesty. But what unsettled him most wasn't her integrity, was what she had revealed about him. Beneath the layers of armor, cynicism, and carefully cultivated cruelty, There was still a man who longed for something real, something human. The thought terrified him, but for the first time in years, it also filled him with a fragile, almost childlike hope. The night that was supposed to confirm his darkest suspicions about human nature had instead cracked open a door he thought was sealed forever. Grace Morgan, without knowing it, had given him something no amount of wealth or ruthless ambition had ever secured: hope that love might actually exist. The morning after Sebastian woke before dawn, not from stress, not from the relentless demands of business, but because his mind refused to release the memories of the night before. Grace's voice echoed in his thoughts, soft yet steady: wealth and success cannot replace human connection. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, he watched the sunrise cast Manhattan in shades of gold and amber. For the first time since boyhood, he felt a flicker of excitement about the future. Not a deal, not an acquisition, not another hollow victory, but something far greater. Grace would arrive soon, punctual as always. And for once, he wasn't thinking of her as stuff. He was simply looking forward to her, to the sound of her voice, to the lightness she carried with her. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who scrubbed his marble floors had somehow cleansed years of bitterness from his soul. Grace, who owned so little in material terms, had revealed treasures he had never touched: compassion, dignity, peace. The shift Sebastian spent the quiet hours of morning doing something foreign, almost uncomfortable. He thought not of strategies, profits, or manipulation, but of her. What made Grace happy? What private dreams did she guard in the stillness of her evenings? How could he bring her joy without turning it into a transaction, without making her feel like she was a project or a charity case? The question unsettled him. He had built empires by calculating what people wanted and giving it to them at a price. But with Grace, the equation was different. He didn't want to buy her happiness. He wanted to share in it. And that realization, simple, terrifying, liberating, was the beginning of a transformation Sebastian Vale had never believed possible. When Grace arrived that morning, she found Sebastian waiting not in his usual battlefield of boardrooms or offices, but in the kitchen, the warm heart of any home. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee, and for once, the man who controlled skyscrapers and empires looked almost human. Sebastian had prepared her coffee exactly as she liked it. He hadn't asked, he had simply noticed. A splash of cream, no sugar, practical and uncomplicated, just like her. "Good morning, Grace," he said, offering her the steaming cup. His hands, steady as ever in multi-million-dollar negotiations, felt curiously uncertain now. Grace accepted the coffee with a surprised smile, her cheeks touched with a natural blush no luxury brand could ever manufacture. "Thank you, Mr. Vale. This is very kind of you. I hope you're feeling better this morning." Sebastian returned the smile, recalling the performance he had staged the night before. "Much better, thank you, actually. I've been thinking about our conversation. I wondered if you might join me for breakfast before you begin your work." The request startled her, but Grace nodded with quiet dignity. "I would be honored, Mr. Vale." They sat together at the granite breakfast bar. The setting was sleek, cold marble, but the air between them carried an unfamiliar warmth. Sebastian found himself studying Grace with new eyes. She wore no diamonds, no designer gowns, yet she carried an elegance more profound than anything money could buy. It was in the way she listened fully, without distraction. The way she weighed her words before speaking, as if each one mattered, and the smile, genuine, luminous, that seemed to light the room from within. "Grace, I have a confession to make, Sebastian began, then faltered. The words felt heavier than any contract clause he had ever spoken. How did one explain cruelty, disguised as curiosity, manipulation dressed as a test? Last night, he said finally, I was not as intoxicated as I appeared. Grace's brows lifted, but her expression remained calm, steady, almost forgiving. I wondered about that, Mr. Vale. Your speech seemed to clear up quite a bit. As the evening went on, for the first time in years, heat rose in Sebastian's cheeks. Embarrassment. When had he last felt that? You knew I was testing you, he asked quietly. I suspected something, Grace admitted with gentle honesty, but I also thought you seemed troubled. Whether you were drunk or not, you looked like someone who needed a friend. The simplicity of her response hit him harder than any accusation. Even knowing she was being tested, Grace had chosen kindness. Even suspecting manipulation, she had offered compassion, and in that moment, a lifetime of carefully built walls began to crumble. Over the following weeks, the collapse wasn't sudden, but it was steady. Sebastian found excuses to see Grace that stretched far beyond employer-employee necessity. He began leaving his office earlier, timing his arrivals to match her schedule. He started taking lunch at home instead of exclusive restaurants, eager for small moments, her voice drifting from the kitchen, the quiet grace of her movements through his space. Their conversations lengthened, shifting from polite exchanges to personal revelations. Grace spoke of books, of dreams, of the belief that goodness, quiet, persistent goodness could shape the world. Sebastian, to his own astonishment, found himself listening, really listening, and more than that, wanting to believe. Grace often spoke of her childhood in a small town just outside the city, a place where neighbors shared without keeping score, where community meant something tangible and lasting. To Sebastian, her words felt like stories from another universe, a world untouched by greed or suspicion, and yet they stirred something deep within him. He found himself confessing memories he had long buried, his mother's abandoned garden, left wild after her passing, the treehouse his father once helped him build before bitterness poisoned their bond, the dreams he had once dared to harbor before survival hardened into strategy. One afternoon, as they stood together on his terrace, clouds drifting lazily across the autumn sky, Grace turned to him. You know, she said softly, I think the little boy who built tree houses is still inside you somewhere. He's just buried under years of having to be strong and suspicious. Sebastian looked down at her, struck by the clarity in her gaze. That little boy was foolish and naive. He trusted people who hurt him. Grace tilted her head, considering. But he also knew how to love and be loved. That is not foolishness, Mr. Vale. That's the most important skill anyone can have. Her words struck like a stone against frozen glass, cracking something open inside his chest. For the first time in decades, he wanted vulnerability. He wanted to believe that love could exist outside of transactions, stronger than the fears that had ruled his life for so long. The father's opposition, but the past did not release him so easily. His father, Robert Vale, had built his empire on ruthless determination and careful calculation, and he had passed both traits to his son, along with a deep mistrust of anyone who might want something from the Vale fortune. When Robert discovered Sebastian's growing closeness to Grace, his response was swift and merciless. At their weekly business dinner in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Robert leaned across the table, voice low but venomous. Have you lost your mind, Shep? Is a maid, Sebastian. A common maid, who cleans toilets and changes sheets. Sebastian's jaw tightened at the contempt in his father's tone. Grace is not common. She is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. Robert's laugh was sharp, bitter, cutting through the hush of fine crystal and whispered conversations. Extraordinary. What could possibly be extraordinary about a woman who scrubs floors for a living? Don't be a fool, son. She's after your money. They all are. You're wrong, Sebastian replied, his voice steady with conviction that surprised even himself. Grace has never asked me for anything, not money, not favors, not opportunities. She doesn't even know I see her as anything more than an employee. Robert's eyes narrowed, hard as polished steel. He leaned forward, each word precise, deliberate. Then she is cleverer than most, playing hard to get, pretending indifference is the oldest trick in the book. Mark my words, Sebastian, Robert said, voice sharp as glass. The moment you show real interest in this woman, she'll reveal her true nature. She'll want jewelry, vacations, a lifestyle upgrade. They always do. Sebastian pushed back his chair and stood, unable to bear the poison in his father's words. Not everyone is like mother, father, he said, his voice low but steady. Not every woman abandons the people she loves for a better financial opportunity. The mention of his mother's betrayal carved fresh lines of bitterness into Robert's face. Your mother taught us both a lesson about trusting people who come from different worlds, he said coldly. Do not repeat my mistakes, Sebastian. But as Sebastian walked out of the restaurant and into the cool Manhattan night, he realized something with startling clarity. His father's mistrust was a prison, one Sebastian had lived in all his life, and unlike Robert, he now saw a way out. The confession, he couldn't keep pretending. Grace was no longer just an employee. She was the anchor that steadied him, the light that cracked through walls he thought were unbreakable. The thought of losing her to silence his own cowardice had become unbearable, so he planned his confession. Not as a strategy, not as a performance, but as a man prepared to risk everything. On a quiet Sunday evening, when the penthouse was hushed and empty, he found Grace in his library. She was dusting his collection of rare books with the same reverence she gave to everything she touched. The late afternoon sun poured through the towering windows, turning her auburn hair into strands of fire, painting her in a glow that made her seem almost untouchable. Grace, Sebastian said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her smile warm and genuine, the one smile that had become the brightest part of his days. Of course, Mr. Vale, is everything all right? He drew in a deep breath. His palms were damp, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in a boardroom battle. Grace, he began, his voice rough with unspoken years, I need to tell you something important, and I hope you'll let me finish before you respond. Something in his tone made her set aside the dusting cloth. She gave him her full attention, her expression calm but curious. Over these past few months, Sebastian continued, you've shown me things I thought I'd lost forever. You've taught me that kindness is not weakness, that trust is not foolishness, that goodness, the real kind, still exists in this world. Grace's eyes widened slightly, a shimmer of emotion crossing her face, but she said nothing. She simply listened, and for Sebastian, that silence was both terrifying and the most beautiful gift she could give. I am in love with you, Grace, Sebastian said, the words tumbling out with a force that was both terrifying and liberating. Not because of what you've done for me, not because of money or status, but because you are the most remarkable person I've ever known. For a long moment, Grace only stared at him. Sebastian's heart hammered against his ribs. Had he misread her kindness? Had he just destroyed the one true connection in his life by asking for more than friendship? Then Grace stepped closer, tears shimmering in her eyes. When she spoke, her voice trembled, yet carried the sweetest certainty. "Sebastian," she whispered, using his first name for the first time, "I have loved you for months, but I never dared to hope that someone like you could ever care for someone like me." He reached for her hands, marveling at how perfectly they fit into his own. "Someone like me. Grace, you are everything I am. Not kind, generous, genuinely good. If anything, I'm the one who doesn't deserve you." She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No, Sebastian. We deserve each other. We deserve to be happy." When he kissed her for the first time, standing among shelves of leather-bound books as the Manhattan sun melted into the horizon, Sebastian finally understood what Grace had been teaching him all along. Love was not a transaction, not a strategy, not a bargain. It was a gift, freely given, gratefully received. A gift with the power to transform even the most guarded heart. 6 months later, the same library now overflowed with laughter, music, and the fragrance of fresh flowers. Friends and family gathered for a wedding, not the grand society event his father had once demanded, but an intimate celebration of a love that had conquered every barrier. Grace walked toward him in a simple yet elegant dress, her radiant smile brighter than all the diamonds in Manhattan. Robert Vale stood at his son's side, no longer hardened by bitterness. Grace's quiet influence had shown him that love did not weaken Sebastian, it strengthened him. The cold, calculating businessman had become a man who used his power to lift others, who embraced joy in simple moments, and who faced life with trust instead of suspicion. When Sebastian and Grace exchanged the vows they had written themselves, promising to choose love over fear, trust over cynicism, Sebastian's thoughts returned to the night of his confession. What had begun as a cruel test of human nature had revealed something far greater, that love, when it is genuine and freely given, has the power to heal any wound and overcome any obstacle. Grace had not simply passed Sebastian's test, she had transformed it into something beautiful. She showed him that the greatest fortune was not measured in dollars, but in the connections between hearts. That the most valuable acquisition was not a company or a property, but the trust and love of another human being as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Sebastian knew that Grace had given him the greatest gift of all. She had taught him how to live, how to love, and how to believe in the impossible, that two people from different worlds could create something extraordinary together. Their story became legendary not because of Sebastian's fortune, nor because Grace went from Maid to Billionaire's wife, but because it proved a timeless truth, that love can cross every boundary when it is built on respect, on genuine care, and on the courage to trust another soul completely in the end. Sebastian realized that Grace had been right from the very beginning. Character is revealed when no one is watching, and the richest person is not the one who owns the most, but the one who needs the least, because they already have everything that truly matters: love, trust, and hope for the future.